There are certain women who walk the surface of this existence carrying something immeasurably ancient within them, a silent and gravitational wisdom that precedes chronological time itself, and that distinguishes them, irrevocably and almost palpably, from the frenetic and superficial world that surrounds them. You feel it immediately when you meet them, even if you can't articulate it in words at first. There is a spiritual gravity in their eyes, a magnetic resonance that vibrates at a frequency that the rational and logical mind often cannot decode, but which the soul in its silent language instantly recognizes as a sister, as a refuge. The presence of these women sustains an abyssal depth that could never be learned through reading academic books or borrowed from common life experiences, for this substance springs from within, emerging like living, crystalline water from an underground source that flows uninterruptedly, long before this current life even began to be dreamed of. Something in the unfathomable gaze of these women speaks of epic and forgotten journeys, traversed through inner landscapes that most modern people don't even suspect exist. They carry a secret mapping of psychic territories abandoned by contemporary consciousness in its race for material progress. Carl Jung, the great cartographer of the human psyche and explorer of the mysteries of the soul, often spoke of individuals who seemed to carry the accumulated wisdom of the collective unconscious, vast and expansive consciousnesses that have traveled through geological layers of human experience far beyond what a single biological life, limited by birth and death, could contain. These are not mere abstract theories for intellectual debate or romantic notions created to console those who feel maladjusted. They are recognizable archetypal patterns, living forces of nature that emerge organically in the psyche of certain women, marking them with the seal of depth. 10 distinct and unmistakable signs reveal themselves effortlessly and without conscious intention, manifesting in daily life not as a performance, but as an essence. The woman with an old soul does not rationally choose to possess these traits. They choose her. They inhabit her. She lives them because she cannot, under any circumstances, live any other way, as naturally and inevitably as a river follows the course carved by ancient waters in its eternal quest for the ocean. What you are about to discover in this profound analysis may mirror something you have always felt pulsing in the darkness of your room, but never had the proper language or the courage to name. These 10 signs are not achievements to attain, not trophies of personal development to pursue or display on social media. They are archaeological revelations of what already exists buried beneath the surface of your being, a discovery of the very structure of your soul. Recognizing them does not create them. It simply brings to the relentless light of consciousness what has been your truth all along. And this recognition has the power to absolutely change everything about how you understand yourself, your story, and your solitary place in a world that often seems to have been designed for an entirely different kind of person. Lighter, faster, and less profound. The first sign, and perhaps the most painful of all, manifests as a devouring existential hunger that no material comfort, no luxury, and no fleeting pleasure can satisfy. While the masses find contentment and distraction in the accumulation of objects, the pursuit of status, and the external validation of ephemeral social achievements, the woman with an old soul awakens each morning with a question burning silently, yet fiercely within her ribcage. What does it all really mean? What is the purpose hidden behind the veil of appearances? This question is not a philosophical pastime to fill spare hours or an idle Sunday curiosity. It is a vital and urgent need, as critical as breath for the lungs or water for a dehydrated body in the desert. She cannot ignore this call from the depths, even as she desperately tries to conform to normality in order to be accepted. Her relentless search for meaning often leads her away from conventional paths, away from the roads paved by common sense and familiar expectations. While others follow prescribed paths to financial success and bourgeois stability, she finds herself irresistibly drawn, like a moth to a flame, to hermetic philosophy, depth psychology, alchemy, and ancient spiritual traditions that speak to the slow evolution of the soul, rather than the quick gratification of the ego. She reads Jung, studies the mystics, and delves into sacred texts not out of distant academic interest or to obtain degrees, but because those ancient words accurately describe an inner terrain she has navigated alone, without a map, since her earliest childhood. She recognizes herself with almost physical relief in his descriptions of the individuation process, that long, perilous, and often solitary journey of becoming who you truly are, shedding the heavy layers of social conditioning, inherited traumas, and others' expectations. This quest leads her to inner places others cannot comprehend, often creating a chasm of silence between her deepest motivations and the superficial desires of the outside world. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by a longing for a place you've never been in this life? The second sign manifests as an inexplicable, almost magnetic connection to certain geographical locations, ancient cultures, or specific historical periods. A resonance that defies any linear logic or genetic explanation. A woman with an old soul might encounter a landscape, see a photograph of a ruined temple, or hear an ancient melody and feel such a profound and visceral recognition that it brings immediate tears to her eyes. It's not the gentle nostalgia of a remembered vacation, but a cellular memory, sharp and piercing, that transcends this single existence. He stands before ancient ruins in the Mediterranean, or walks through a dense forest and something within her whispers with absolute and frightening certainty, "I know this place. I've been here. I've loved and lost here." She might feel an inexplicable technical affinity for Celtic spirituality and its druids, or find herself moved to the point of sobbing by the silent precision of the Japanese tea ceremony, or feel a sense of home when studying indigenous and shamanic wisdom traditions. These are not casual hobby interests or superficial aesthetic preferences for decoration. They seem like reactivated memories, archives that are opened rather than acquired knowledge. When she encounters these resonances in the external world, something within her physical and psychic structure deeply relaxes, as if a part of her that has been holding its breath and tensing its muscles for centuries could finally exhale and rest. It's not necessarily about proving a literal past life memory, though she might legitimately wonder about that in the silence of her reflections, but rather a powerful archetypal resonance. Her soul recognizes patterns and atmospheres it has witnessed throughout humanity's vast and continuous memory, spontaneously accessing what Jung and other esoteric traditions called records of ancestral human experience, or the collective unconscious. The third sign reveals itself in the radical and often exhausting way she relates to the suffering of others. Her compassion is not a performative virtue to be praised, nor is it cultivated through moral or religious effort to secure a place in heaven. It emerges naturally, uncontrollably, like a spring of water that cannot help but flow when the earth is saturated. The woman with an old soul perceives the fundamental and invisible unity between all living beings, not as a pretty spiritual concept to post on the internet, but as a lived, physical, and often painful reality. When she witnesses pain, injustice, or cruelty against another being, human or animal, she cannot intellectually separate herself from it. She feels the pain reverberate in her own flesh, in her own nervous system. She recognizes suffering as an integral part of the universal human experience, and the boundaries between self and other seem permeable to her in ways that can be experienced both as a sacred gift of connection and as a heavy burden of hypersensitivity. Her desire to help, to heal, to listen arises without any need for public recognition, applause, or gratitude. She gives because giving is the natural expression of her cellular understanding that there is no real separation, that we are all threads of the same tapestry. When someone suffers, a part of her suffers along with them, not in a codependent, unhealthy, or boundless way, but from a genuine and mature recognition of the interconnectedness of all things, the web of life. One world. This empathy, however, can be devastatingly exhausting, as she feels the psychic weight of the world more acutely than most people around her. She cannot easily turn her back on suffering, close her eyes, or cynically dismiss it as someone else's problem. She often silently carries the awareness of collective pain that others manage to ignore through distraction, entertainment, or denial. Yet, and here lies the great mystery, Despite this strange sensitivity and almost unprotected skin, the fourth sign emerges as a living paradox, an unwavering inner calm and a steely resilience. External crises, the chaos of the world, and everyday emergencies do not destabilize her deep core. She has witnessed, through some mysterious inner knowledge accumulated in previous journeys, the transient and cyclical nature of all human dramas. While others panic, scream, and despair during the turbulence and uncertainty, she effortlessly becomes a natural point of stability, the eye of the storm, the still axis around which the tempest swirls and roars, not because she is indifferent, cold, or detached from reality, but because she has learned on a visceral and ancient level that the storm, however violent, always passes. She has developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the rare ability to maintain the unbearable tension between opposites, fear and courage, life and death, light and shadow, without psychologically collapsing on one side or the other. In moments of collective despair, in family crises or in social collapses, people instinctively, almost like animals seeking shelter, turn to her, feeling her deep grounding, even if they cannot logically articulate why they trust her. Her mere presence communicates, without the need for elaborate words, that it is possible to remain centered when the world tilts and the ground shakes. She doesn't preach sermons or try to reassure with empty cliches of superficial optimism that insult intelligence. Her very being, her very posture, becomes a living reminder that there is something within us that cannot be destroyed by external circumstances, an indestructible core essence, the self, that survives every loss, every grief, and every betrayal. This quality makes her a natural counselor, the wound healer, the friend others call on in the dead of night during a crisis, the colleague who remains lucid and strategic when everyone else is reactive and blinded by fear. This hard-won inner stability allows the fifth sign to manifest with particular, and sometimes frightening, clarity. She is perpetually ahead of her time, perceiving subtle patterns, trends, and cultural shifts long before they become obvious to the masses or the media. Jungian thought explains this phenomenon as a heightened and intuitive sensitivity to archetypal patterns that stir in the depths of the collective unconscious before emerging and crystallizing into social movements, fashions, or widespread consciousness. Jung firmly believed that major cultural and historical shifts first emerge as subtle tremors in the unconscious, rippling outward in strange dreams, visionary art, and the sudden intuitions of sensitive individuals, long before they manifest as obvious social phenomena in newspapers. However, this gift of foresight, this ability to see what lies around the bend in the river, often isolates her in a tower of misunderstanding and solitude. When she speaks of the changes she perceives approaching on the horizon, when she warns of the dangerous paths society is taking, others may dismiss her with disdain, labeling her impractical, strange, a witch, or excessively dramatic and pessimistic. They are not ready. Their eyes have not yet adapted to see what she sees with such crystal clarity. Years later, sometimes decades, when her observations become the new normal and obvious reality for everyone, no one remembers that she spoke of it first, that she saw the signs when the sky still seemed blue. To be a pioneer, a scout who walks ahead of the tribe, means carrying the inherent solitude of vision. She has learned often through the pain of rejection and ridicule, not to over-explain, to keep her visions to herself, for those who are ready will understand with half a word, and those who are not will resist with all the force of their defended egos. No matter how eloquently or clearly she tries to articulate her intuitive knowledge, she walks chronologically ahead of the collective rhythm, which inevitably means that she often walks alone, guided only by her inner compass and the stars that only she can see through the clouds of collective illusion. This necessary distance from mass consciousness and the frenetic rhythms of the modern world naturally leads us to the sixth sign, an unmistakable mark in the life of a woman with an old soul. She not only tolerates solitude, she requires it. She demands it as an essential nutrient for her psychic and spiritual survival. For her, time spent alone is never a sign of social failure, rejection, or a cowardly escape from the responsibilities of adult life. On the contrary, it is the temenos, the sacred and inviolable space where she returns to herself, where the static noise of external demands is silenced so that she can hear the delicate whispers of her own inner world. She often feels like an exile, a stranger in her own chronological time, as if she had disembarked from another, slower era, and was trying with great effort to navigate customs and hurries that seem alien to her contemplative nature. The frantic speed of modern life, the aggressive superficiality of most social interactions at parties and gatherings, the constant noise of notifications, and the perpetual distraction in which others seem to thrive. For her, these things are not stimuli. They are drains that suck her vital energy, leaving her exhausted and fragmented. Moments of solitude, therefore, become vital opportunities for psychic integration, the Jungian term for the process of digesting and organizing the overwhelming influx of a world that moves too fast and values very little of what is eternal. In the profound silence of her room or in the stillness of a morning, she reconnects with the source of her knowledge, that quiet ancestral voice that speaks absolute truth when all that is external is clamor, confusion, and conflicting opinions. Others, observing from the outside, may genuinely worry that she is lonely or depressed, projecting their own terrible fears of emptiness onto her. But she understands deep down the abysmal and insurmountable difference between painful loneliness and sacred solitude. In solitude, she is not fleeing from human connection. She is returning to the deepest possible connection, the uninterrupted dialogue with her own soul and with the mystery of the divine that dwells within her. It is here that she reads, reflects, creates, or simply is, without the exhausting need to perform a role, smile politely, or explain her silences. This capacity for productive and regenerative solitude is one of her greatest hidden strengths, although the extroverted world rarely recognizes it as such, often seeing her as distant or cold. The seventh sign emerges organically from this interiority and appears in her detached relationship with the material world and external markers of success. She cannot, even if she tries, attribute a profound meaning to the accumulation of possessions. Luxury items, new cars, and ostentatious houses feel heavy to her, temporary and ultimately empty of real substance. Jung taught that the experienced soul, the one that has seen the wheel of fortune turn many times, recognizes the utter futility of accumulating what cannot be carried across the threshold of death. She has freed herself from the collective illusion that happiness can be bought in a store, or that social status provides armor against existential anguish. This realization did not come from a moralistic or religious rejection of materialism, like a forced vow of poverty. It arose naturally from her lived experience, from the repeated discovery that every external achievement and every acquisition she pursued in the past left her feeling exactly the same emptiness inside. This does not mean that she lives in misery or rejects beauty and comfort. On the contrary, she finds incalculable richness in simplicity, recognizing the luminous essence beneath the appearance of things. A sunset observed in silence moves her more than an expensive purchase. A genuine and vulnerable conversation nourishes her more than the most prestigious social event in town. She has internalized the truth that only inner growth, the expansion of consciousness, and authentic connections constitute the treasure that moths cannot corrode. Everything else is merely borrowed scenery, props in a theater that we will have to return when the final curtains fall. The eighth sign reveals itself in her magnetic and almost magical affinity with the extremes of life, children, and the elderly. Jung observed that evolved souls recognize in children the archetype of the puer aeternus, the original purity and unfiltered connection to the imaginal realm, and in the elderly, the proximity to the mystery of the end. She sees in a child's eyes something she remembers, a clarity that has not yet been obscured by the brutal conditioning of society. Children, in turn, respond to her differently than they respond to most busy adults. They instinctively feel that she truly sees them, not as future projects to be molded, but as complete souls in small bodies. She listens to their illogical observations and fantasy worlds with profound respect, recognizing in them a wisdom that adults have forgotten. Similarly, she feels a natural patience and reverence for the elderly, those who are preparing for the great departure. She relates to both groups because they are closer to the fleece, the thin boundary between this world and the next. The children have just arrived from the mystery, and the elderly are preparing to return to it. She, the woman with the old soul, remains in that intermediate space, but oriented towards the mystery, serving as a bridge between the worlds. The ninth sign manifests as an organic spiritual hunger that arises from her core, not from fear. Her interest in transcendent realities and the divine does not stem from a midlife crisis, the fear of death, or the need for childlike comfort. It is a biological need of her being, like a plant that instinctively bends towards sunlight. According to analytical psychology, old souls possess a developed intuition that spontaneously perceives the subtle dimensions of reality, the numinous that is invisible to ordinary consciousness. The spiritual realm is not an escape from reality for her, but a recognition of what is fundamentally real, the invisible infrastructure that sustains the visible world. However, rigid religious dogmas, sectarian rules, and us versus them doctrines feel constrictive and suffocating to her expanded vision. She respects traditions, but cannot confine herself to any single interpretation of truth. She is a natural mystic, often practicing a personal syncretism, finding wisdom in Christian mystics, Buddhist meditation, Sufi poetry, and Jungian psychology. She knows that ultimate truth cannot be bottled up in words or mechanical rituals. It must be experienced directly, lived personally, a gnosis discovered through one's own inner journey. The 10th and final sign is perhaps the most powerful and the most difficult to bear, an almost X-ray understanding of human nature and the ability to see through social masks. The woman with an old soul perceives the hidden motivations, the unconscious patterns, and the shadow material that people work so desperately to hide from themselves and others. Jung taught that those who have had the courage to integrate their own shadow, to face their own inner demons, naturally gain the ability to recognize these same patterns in others. It's like reading a map you've already memorized. She is not fooled by superficial charm, academic titles, or impressive displays of power. She reads the energy and intention, the vibration emanating from behind the words. Someone may speak eloquently of love and light, but she senses the cold narcissism beneath. Another person may be socially awkward and quiet, but she perceives the golden heart and unwavering loyalty hidden there. This perceptiveness protects her from manipulation and false relationships, for she cannot be easily seduced by appearances. She sees what is real. However, and here lies the tragedy and the beauty, this clarity also breeds a very specific kind of loneliness. When you see through pretense, genuine social connection becomes rare and precious as a diamond. Small talk exhausts her not because she is arrogant, but because she perceives the real pains, fears, and desires that are being suppressed beneath polite conversation about the weather or work. She finds herself surrounded by people, yet feeling profoundly alone, because few are willing or able to meet her in that depth of naked truth where she resides. But she doesn't judge. If anything, this insight makes her more compassionate, for she sees the wounded child within every aggressive adult, the fear behind every act of arrogance. These 10 signs are not medals to display. They are the bone structure of who you are. The woman with an old soul doesn't seek to prove her maturity to anyone, least of all to herself. She simply lives in this reality, often without realizing how radically different her inner world is from those around her. She may spend her entire life feeling like an outsider, questioning why she can't simply be normal, why the things that satisfy everyone else seem gray to her. But Jung reminds us throughout his work that self-recognition, individuation, is not an invitation to pride but to responsibility. Recognizing yourself as an old soul requires you to honor your unique path, to accept both the gifts of vision and the burdens of feeling too much. You cannot unknow what you know. You cannot close the eyes that have been opened. You cannot return to unconsciousness once consciousness has awakened. This is your sacred task, to live your truth with non-negotiable integrity, even when the world doesn't understand, doesn't applaud, or doesn't value what you offer. The true hallmark of an evolved soul is humility before the infinite mystery of existence. She knows that, no matter how much she understands, There are endless oceans of mystery still hidden from view. Each answer only opens to deeper questions. She walks her path with dignity and a quiet grace, seeking no stage, simply being true to the ancient wisdom that lives, breathes, and pulsates within her. She has finally learned that her worth does not depend on being understood by others. It exists intrinsically woven into the very web of the universe. If these signs resonated with something deep within you, perhaps you have always known what you are, and only now are you finding the words to name your own essence. This recognition is not the end of a journey. It is the beginning of a life lived without apologies. You are not alone in this way of being, although the fog of everyday life often makes it seem otherwise. There are others who walk this same solitary path, who understand this bittersweet mix of gifts and isolation, who see what you see and feel what you feel. We are a silent legion. If this content touched the deepest part of your soul, leave a like as a sign of appreciation. Share your experience in the comments. Which of these signs is your most painful truth? And subscribe to the channel to continue uncovering the revelations that the modern world has forgotten.